Story number 1. Shadows among the graves. Winter in Minnesota is a time when the landscape transforms into a frozen masterpiece. Every tree and field cloaked in pristine white. In 1895, my friends and I, Samuel, Martha, and I embarked on what was supposed to be a routine journey across the state. We were a group of adventurous souls, bound by friendship and a shared love for exploration. Little did we know, the harsh winter would test our bonds and plunge us into a nightmare we could never have imagined. We were traveling in Samuel's sturdy horse-drawn carriage, a reliable vessel that had carried us through many terrains. Our destination was a small village nestled deep within the woods, a place untouched by the rapid changes sweeping across the state. The journey was long, the roads treacherous under the weight of the relentless snowstorm that had descended upon us unexpectedly. By the second night, the storm had intensified, the wind howling like a chorus of lost spirits, and the snow falling in thick, blinding sheets. Visibility was reduced to mere feet, the world outside our carriage a swirling vortex of white. We decided to make camp for the night, pulling our carriage off the narrow, winding path and setting up a makeshift shelter in a small clearing. As we huddled together, trying to keep warm, the storm showed no signs of relenting. The cold seeped into our bones, and the howling winds rattled the flimsy walls of our shelter. It was then that we heard it, a faint, melancholic melody carried by the wind, a haunting lullaby that seemed to echo through the trees. "Do you hear that?" Martha whispered, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. Samuel nodded, his expression grim. "It's the storm, nothing more." But the melody persisted, growing louder and more distinct with each passing minute. It was as if someone or something was singing directly to us from the heart of the storm. The haunting tune sent shivers down our spines, and an uneasy silence fell over our group. Suddenly, out of the blinding snow, a figure emerged, a woman dressed in a tattered gown, her face pale and sorrowful. She stood at the edge of our camp, her presence both ethereal and unsettling. The wind seemed to part around her, and the snowflakes danced in her wake, creating an aura of otherworldly beauty. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's fury. "Help me." Before we could react, she reached out a trembling hand, her fingers brushing against the icy air. "I am lost," she continued, her eyes pleading. "Find me." Without warning, the figure dissolved into the swirling snow, leaving us in stunned silence. The melody ceased as abruptly as it had begun, replaced by the relentless howling of the wind. We sat there, hearts pounding, trying to make sense of the apparition that had just visited us. The night wore on, and the storm showed no mercy. We took turns keeping watch, each of us haunted by the memory of the sorrowful woman. As dawn broke, the storm began to abate, the snow gradually settling into a serene blanket of white. Exhausted and weary, we decided to continue our journey, eager to leave the eerie encounter behind. But as we resumed our trek, an unsettling realization dawned upon us. We were no longer on the familiar path that had led us to the clearing. Instead, we found ourselves surrounded by a dense forest, the trees heavy with snow and the ground blanketed in white. The tracks we had followed earlier were nowhere to be seen, replaced by an expanse of untouched snow that stretched endlessly in all directions. Panic set in as we tried to navigate our way back. But the forest seemed to shift around us, the storm's remnants making every direction appear identical. It was as if the land itself had been altered, trapping us in a labyrinth of ice and snow. Hours passed with no sign of a clear path, our hopes dwindling as the reality of our situation settled in. As the sun reached its zenith, casting a pale light over the snow-covered landscape, we stumbled upon a small, weathered graveyard hidden within the woods. The graves were old, their markers worn by time and the elements, names barely legible beneath layers of snow. It was there, among the silent stones, that we found a solitary, fresh grave marked with the name Eleanor Whitaker, A chill ran down my spine as I realized the connection. The woman we had encountered, Eleanor Whitaker, a name that resonated with a story of loss and tragedy from local lore. According to the tales passed down through generations, Eleanor had lost her child to a vicious blizzard many years ago. Her grief so profound that her spirit was said to wander the woods, searching for her lost one. "We have to find her," Samuel said, his voice filled with determination and fear. "She needs our help." Driven by a mix of empathy and desperation, we decided to conduct a makeshift search, hoping to bring peace to Eleanor's restless spirit. Armed with lanterns and shovels, we began to dig through the fresh snow, our hands numb from the cold. The grave yielded nothing, no child, no evidence of recent disturbance. It was as if the snow had hidden her from the world once more. Frustration and fear mounted as we realized the futility of our efforts. The forest around us seemed to close in, the trees whispering secrets we couldn't comprehend. The air grew colder, the shadows lengthening as the day progressed. It was then that we heard it, the same haunting melody that had greeted us the night before, now emanating from the heart of the forest. "We're not alone," Martha whispered, clutching Samuel's arm. The melody led us deeper into the woods, the snow crunching beneath our feet as we followed the ethereal tune. The forest seemed alive, the trees swaying to the rhythm of the lullaby, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. As we ventured further, the music grew louder, more intense, guiding us towards an old, abandoned cabin hidden amidst the dense foliage. The cabin stood as a relic of the past, its wooden structure weathered and covered in snow. The windows were shattered, and the door hung ajar, creaking softly in the wind. We approached cautiously, the haunting melody now filling the air around us, wrapping us in its sorrowful embrace. Inside, the cabin was cold and dark, the remnants of a bygone era scattered across the floor. A fireplace sat cold and empty, its hearth covered in layers of dust. In the center of the room stood a large mirror, its surface covered in frost, reflecting the flickering light of our lanterns. As we stepped closer, the mirror began to shimmer, revealing the ghostly image of Eleanor Whitaker once more. "Eleanor," Samuel whispered, his voice trembling. "We're here to help you." The apparition reached out towards us, her hands ghostly and transparent. "Find my child," she pleaded, her voice filled with an unending sorrow. "He is still out there, lost in the storm." Determined to fulfill her request, we searched the cabin, finding nothing but more remnants of the past, old photographs, letters, and personal items that spoke of a life abruptly halted by tragedy. It was clear that Eleanor's spirit was bound to this place, her grief anchoring her to the world of the living. As we prepared to leave, the temperature dropped sharply, the air thick with the presence of the restless spirit. Eleanor's image faded, replaced by the overwhelming feeling of loss that permeated the cabin. We knew that our encounter was not just a figment of the storm's fury, but a genuine plea from a grieving mother trapped by her sorrow. Exhausted and emotionally drained, we left the cabin, the haunting melody lingering in the air as we made our way back through the snow-covered woods. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by our ordeal. The path back to the village was clear, but the memory of Eleanor's sorrow and our failed attempt to help her haunted us, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits that linger in the shadows. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the experience remains etched in my memory, a chilling reminder of the power of grief and the enduring bonds of love. The story of Eleanor Whitaker became a part of our village's lore, a tale of loss and the supernatural forces that seek to ease the suffering of those left behind. Sometimes, on particularly cold nights, I find myself gazing out into the snow-covered woods, listening for the faint echoes of Eleanor's lullaby. The winds whisper through the trees, carrying with them the sorrowful melody that once led us into the heart of the storm. It's a haunting reminder that some spirits never truly find peace, their cries lingering in the frozen silence, waiting for someone to hear their plea. If you ever find yourself journeying through the remote winters of Minnesota, heed the tales of Frostwood and the restless spirit of Eleanor Whitaker. Respect the histories embedded in these silent landscapes, for some souls remain bound by their grief, yearning for someone to listen and help them find their way home amidst the endless snow. Story number 2. Whispers in the White Storm. Winter in Colorado is a realm of untamed beauty and relentless fury. The Rocky Mountains stand as silent sentinels, their peaks cloaked in pristine snow, while the valleys below are swallowed by blinding whiteouts that erase all sense of direction. In 1978, my wife, Laura, and I decided to embark on a winter road trip. Eager to escape the confines of our everyday lives and immerse ourselves in the raw majesty of the wilderness. Little did we know, our journey would lead us into a nightmare that would forever alter our perception of the natural world. We had planned the trip meticulously, renting a sturdy SUV equipped with all the essentials for a prolonged stay in the mountains. Our destination was a secluded cabin nestled deep within the Rockies, a place we had heard offered unparalleled solitude and breathtaking vistas. The drive itself was a marvel, the snow-covered roads winding through dense forests and past frozen lakes that shimmered under the pale winter sun. On our third day, as we ventured further into the heart of the mountains, a severe snowstorm began to brew. The sky darkened ominously, and the first heavy flakes started to fall, quickly escalating into a blinding blizzard. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the wind howled with a ferocity that seemed almost sentient, as if the storm itself was alive and intent on thwarting our progress. We decided to pull over at a rest stop we had passed earlier, hoping to wait out the worst of the storm. The rest area was deserted, the only sign of life being the occasional snowmobile tracks etched into the fresh snow. As we parked and secured our vehicle, Laura suggested we take a short walk to stretch our legs, the cold bite of the storm invigorating our tired muscles. The snow crunched under our boots as we made our way to a nearby lookout point. The landscape around us transformed into a monochromatic expanse of white. The wind whipped around us, carrying with it an eerie silence that was both beautiful and unsettling. As we reached the edge of the lookout, we were met with a panoramic view of the storm raging below, the snow swirling in a chaotic dance that seemed to mirror the turmoil within our souls. That's when I saw her, a white shadow floating eerily in front of our SUV, her form barely discernible against the blinding snow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a mirage created by the storm's intensity. But as I watched, the figure became more defined, her translucent body swaying gently in the howling wind. She stood motionless, her presence both captivating and unnerving. "Did you see that?" I asked Laura, my voice tinged with both fear and fascination. She nodded, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's probably just a trick of the storm. Let's get back inside." We hurried back to the car, the sense of unease growing with each step. As we drove away, the white shadow seemed to watch us, her gaze piercing through the windshield, determined to shake off the haunting image. We focused on navigating the treacherous roads, the storm making each mile a battle against the elements. But the storm showed no mercy. The snow piled higher, the wind's fury unabated, until suddenly, the white shadow vanished from our view. Relieved, we let out a breath we didn't realize we were holding, believing the sighting was nothing more than a figment of our stressed minds. It was then that disaster struck. Without warning, the ground beneath us gave way, and a massive avalanche erupted from the mountainside, the snow cascading towards our car with terrifying speed. The SUV skidded uncontrollably, the tires losing traction on the icy surface. Time seemed to slow as the avalanche engulfed us, the sheer force of nature threatening to tear us apart. In that split second, I remembered the white shadow, her silent plea etched into my memory. As the avalanche bore down, I felt an inexplicable sense of calm, as if the spirit of the woman had somehow intervened, diverting the deadly force away from us. The snow roared around us, enveloping the car in a suffocating embrace. But miraculously, we remained intact. The storm subsided as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a transformed landscape of shattered trees and buried trails. Dazed and disoriented, we managed to crawl out of the SUV, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The snow had piled up to incredible heights, altering the very geography of the area. As we assessed the damage, we noticed something extraordinary. The exact spot where the white shadow had stood was now a smooth, untouched patch of snow, as if the avalanche had been redirected to protect us. Over the following days, we struggled to find our way back to civilization, the storm having rendered most roads impassable. We survived on the supplies we had brought, rationing food and melting snow for water. Yet, despite the harsh conditions, a lingering sense of gratitude kept us going, a silent acknowledgement of the mysterious force that had saved our lives. One evening, as we huddled around a makeshift fire, Laura shared her thoughts. "Do you think we were saved by a spirit? The woman we saw, maybe she was trying to protect us." I nodded slowly, the idea both comforting and unsettling. "It's possible. Maybe her presence was a sign, a guardian in the storm." The days turned into weeks, and our ordeal became a tale of survival and unexplained phenomena. Eventually, we were rescued by a search party that had been combing the mountains, the news of our miraculous escape spreading like wildfire. But the mystery of the white shadow remained unsolved, a ghostly enigma that left us with more questions than answers. Back home, the memory of that storm lingered, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the supernatural. Laura and I often found ourselves contemplating the nature of the spirit we had encountered, the way her presence had altered the course of the storm and saved our lives. We never saw her again, but sometimes, on particularly fierce winter nights, I swear I can feel her watchful presence, a silent guardian amidst the chaos of nature. Years later, the story of our survival became a local legend, a cautionary tale of the Rockies' hidden mysteries and the spirits that protect them. Friends and neighbors listened in awe as we recounted our experience, the white shadow a symbol of hope and protection against the unforgiving winter. Reflecting on that fateful trip, I realized that some encounters defy explanation, bridging the gap between reality and the unknown. The Rockies hold secrets that remain buried beneath layers of snow, stories of love, loss, and the enduring power of the human spirit. And in the heart of the storm, amidst the white silence, lies the eternal dance of the living and the spirits who watch over them. If you ever find yourself traversing the remote trails of Colorado during a brutal winter storm, remember our story. Respect the forces of nature and the unseen guardians that may be watching, ready to protect those who dare to venture into their realm. For in the depths of the blizzard, amidst the swirling snow, you are never truly alone. Story number 3. Hands of the Storm. Winter in Vermont has a way of swallowing the world whole. The snow blankets every inch of land, muting sounds and creating an oppressive silence that presses against the walls of even the sturdiest homes. In 1946, my family and I found ourselves trapped in our farmhouse, a relic of simpler times, as a relentless blizzard descended upon us. Little did we know, the storm would bring more than just snow and ice. It would bring a haunting that would etch itself into our lives forever. I'm Thomas Whitaker, the eldest of 3 children, and looking back, that winter feels like a lifetime ago. My parents, Eleanor and George, had always been cautious, preparing meticulously for the harsh Vermont winters. Yet, nothing could have prepared us for the fury that was about to engulf our home. It was late December when the storm hit. We were celebrating my sister Mary's birthday, gathered around the fireplace in the living room, the warmth a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The wind began to howl, a low, mournful wail that grew louder with each passing minute. At first, we thought it was just another winter storm, but soon the intensity was unmistakable. The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, turning day into night within hours. As the evening wore on, The power flickered and then died, plunging us into darkness save for the flickering light of the fire. My father lit several candles, their small flames casting long, dancing shadows across the room. We huddled together, the storm outside creating an impenetrable barrier between us and the world beyond our windows. That night, as the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls, something strange began to happen. It started with a faint tapping sound, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the living room window. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but the tapping grew louder and more insistent. My father grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the window, his breath visible in the frigid air. Peering out into the blinding snow, he saw nothing, no tree branches, no loose shingles, just an endless expanse of white. Confused, he returned to the group, shrugging it off as a gust of wind. But as midnight approached, the tapping resumed, this time accompanied by a soft, sorrowful whisper that seemed to emanate from the very glass of the window. Mary, our youngest, clutched my mother's hand, her eyes wide with fear. "Mama, do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Eleanor nodded, her face pale. "It's probably just the wind. Mary, stay close to me." But the sounds persisted, growing more distinct and unsettling. Each night, as the storm raged on, a ghostly handprint would appear on the living room window, accompanied by the same haunting whispers. The prints were translucent, almost ethereal, and seemed to form the outline of a small hand pressing against the glass. By morning, as the storm subsided, the prints would vanish without a trace, leaving us with nothing but the lingering fear of what we had witnessed. The days turned into weeks, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. Food supplies dwindled, and our isolation grew more profound with each passing day. The farmhouse, once a symbol of warmth and safety, now felt like a cage, haunted by the unseen presence that taunted us each night. One particularly harsh evening, the wind howled louder than ever, and the snow piled higher against the windows. We sat together in the living room, the candles casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. The tapping began again, louder and more frantic than before, followed by a heart-wrenching wail that echoed through the room. Determined to uncover the source of our torment, my father decided to investigate. Armed with a lantern, he ventured out into the storm, the snow swirling around him like a living entity. He returned minutes later, his face drained of color and his eyes wide with terror. "He saw her," he gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "A little girl, just like Mary." We huddled together, the realization sinking in. The ghostly presence wasn't just a figment of our collective fear. It was a spirit, trapped and seeking something we couldn't yet understand. Eleanor, ever the pragmatic one, suggested we reach out to the local parish for help. But the storm made communication impossible. As the nights wore on, the ghostly interactions intensified. The handprints became more intricate, occasionally forming symbols or letters that we couldn't decipher. The whispers turned into pleading cries, each night conveying a sense of urgent desperation. It was clear that the spirit was trying to communicate, to convey a message that we were too afraid to fully comprehend. One night, the tapping ceased entirely, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. We lay in bed, the tension palpable, until a sudden crash echoed through the house. The fireplace roared to life on its own, casting an otherworldly glow across the room. In the flickering light, we saw her, a spectral figure of a little girl, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow, her dress tattered and drenched from the storm. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing through the room. "Find me." Tears welled in my mother's eyes as she reached out to the apparition. "Who are you? What do you want?" she asked, her voice breaking with emotion. The girl pointed towards the window, her small hand trembling. "Find the buried," she said softly before fading into the shadows, leaving us with more questions than answers. determined to uncover the truth. We spent the following days digging through old records and speaking with the few villagers who remained. We discovered that decades ago, a young girl named Clara Whitaker had gone missing during a fierce blizzard. Her disappearance had never been solved, leaving her family and the village in a state of perpetual mourning. Theories ranged from an accidental fall into the ravine to more sinister explanations, but nothing concrete was ever found. With this newfound knowledge, we realized that Clara's spirit was still searching for closure, for someone to finally uncover the truth of her disappearance. The symbols and letters she had tried to convey were likely clues to her final resting place. Exhausted but resolute, my father organized a search party to scour the surrounding wilderness, hoping to find the answers that had eluded us for so long. After days of relentless searching, we stumbled upon an old, forgotten gravesite nestled deep within the forest. Hidden beneath layers of snow and ice, the grave was marked with a simple stone, barely noticeable against the white expanse. As we approached, the air grew colder, the oppressive presence of Clara's spirit almost tangible. With reverence, we began to dig, uncovering the remains of a small child. It was Clara Whitaker, her body preserved by the freezing temperatures, her face serene in death. The discovery brought a mix of relief and sorrow, knowing that her search was finally over, but also mourning the loss that had defined her short life. That night, as the first signs of spring began to thaw the frozen landscape, we held a memorial service at Clara's grave. Candles flickered in the breeze, casting gentle light upon the stone marker. As we offered prayers and laid flowers, the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. We felt Clara's presence ease, her spirit finally finding the closure it had long sought. The following morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. The farmhouse felt lighter, the ghostly interactions ceased, and a sense of normalcy began to return. We packed our belongings and left the farmhouse behind, the memory of Clara's sorrow and the haunting nights forever etched in our hearts. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the experience remains a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the spirits that linger in search of peace. My family and I moved away, seeking new beginnings, but the story of Clara Whitaker and the ghostly hands that sought our help became a tale we shared with others, a story of love, loss, and the enduring power of compassion. If you ever find yourself in the remote winters of Vermont, surrounded by the silent beauty of snow-covered landscapes, remember the story of the Whitaker family and the ghostly presence that sought their help. Respect the histories embedded in these silent homes, for some spirits remain bound by their sorrow, waiting for someone to hear their cries and help them find peace amidst the endless snow. Story number 4. Whispers beneath the white silence. Winter in North Dakota is a season that tests both the body and the soul. In 1932, our small village of Frostwood, nestled between the vast expanse of the Great Plains and the towering Rockies, was no stranger to harsh winters. But that year, the storm was unlike anything we had ever experienced. The snow fell relentlessly, blanketing our world in an unyielding sheet of white that seemed to swallow sound and hope alike. I remember it clearly. December had been particularly unforgiving, with temperatures plummeting to record lows and the wind howling through the skeletal trees like the cries of the damned. Our village, already isolated by miles of treacherous roads and impassable snowdrifts, found itself cut off from the outside world. Supplies dwindled, and fear began to creep into the hearts of even the most resilient among us. It was on one such night, as the storm raged with a vengeance, that the unthinkable happened. My neighbor, Old Man Harris, was the first to hear it. He was out checking on his livestock when he heard a faint, heart-wrenching cry carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was the howl of a coyote or perhaps a lost soul swept up by the storm. But as the nights grew longer and the cries became more persistent, the villagers could no longer dismiss them as mere tricks of the wind. One evening, as I sat by the fire in my modest cabin, sipping on a cup of bitter coffee, The cries pierced through the howling storm. They were unmistakably human, soft, desperate, and filled with an anguish that tugged at the very core of my being. I glanced out the window, my breath fogging up the glass, but saw nothing beyond the swirling snowflakes and the dim glow of my lantern. The next morning, with the storm showing no signs of relenting, the villagers gathered in the community hall to discuss the mysterious cries. Fear hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of wood smoke and the dampness of the lingering snow. It was decided that we would brave the storm and investigate the source of the cries, hoping to quell the growing unease that threatened to tear our community apart. Equipped with shovels, lanterns, and a determination born of desperation, a group of us ventured out into the blinding blizzard. The snow was thick, each step a laborious effort as we trudged through the knee-deep drifts. The wind whipped around us, carrying the distant echoes of the haunting cries that seemed to guide us deeper into the heart of the storm. Hours passed with little progress, the relentless snow obscuring our path and sapping our strength. Just as hope began to wane, we stumbled upon an eerie sight, a pair of small, delicate footprints leading into the dense forest, immediately following by larger ones that vanished without a trace. It was as if someone or something had been running frantically through the snow, only to dissolve into the storm's fury. Fueled by a mix of fear and determination, we followed the footprints, our lanterns casting long, wavering shadows among the trees. The cries grew louder, more insistent, echoing through the silent woods like the lament of a soul in torment. It was then that we saw her, a figure standing amidst the swirling snow, her form barely visible against the blinding white. She was a woman, her dress tattered and soaked, her face pale and drawn with sorrow. Before we could approach, she raised her arms in a silent plea, her eyes meeting ours with a desperation that spoke volumes. Without warning, she turned and began to run, her feet leaving no trace on the freshly fallen snow. We chased after her, the cries now mingling with our pounding hearts. But she vanished into the storm as abruptly as she had appeared. Breathless and shaken, we continued our search, the storm showing no signs of relenting. As dawn broke, the storm finally began to abate, revealing a landscape transformed by the night's fury. Exhausted and demoralized, we made our way back to the village, the image of the sorrowful woman etched into our minds. It was then that we discovered the cause of the mysterious cries, a shallow grave in the outskirts of the village, partially concealed by the snow. Digging through the icy ground, we unearthed the remains of a young girl, her lifeless eyes staring blankly into the void, a single tear frozen on her cheek. Strangely, her body felt warm to the touch, as if she had only recently perished. The village was plunged into a deeper darkness as we grappled with the reality of her death. Questions swirled like the snowstorms that had claimed her life. How did she end up here? Was it an accident, or something more sinister? Theories ranged from a tragic avalanche to foul play, but no evidence could provide definitive answers. All we knew was that her spirit lingered, trapped beneath the snow, her cries a desperate plea for help. In the weeks that followed, the cries became a constant presence, haunting our nights and eroding the fragile peace that had settled over Frostwood. We attempted to hold vigils, to honor her memory and offer prayers for her soul. But nothing seemed to quell the restless spirit that haunted our village. It was as if her anguish seeped into every corner of our lives, binding us to her tragic fate. One particularly cold night, as the wind howled outside and the fire flickered in the hearth, I found myself alone in my cabin, the weight of the village's grief pressing down on me. The cries returned, louder and more desperate than ever, echoing through the silent halls of my home. I rose from my chair, following the sound to the window, and saw her once more, the sorrowful woman standing amidst the snow, her eyes locked onto mine with an unspoken plea. Unable to resist, I grabbed my coat and ventured out into the storm, the cold seeping into my bones as I made my way to the grave site. The snow was still falling, each flake a silent witness to the tragedy that had befallen our village. As I approached the grave, the cries intensified, merging with the storm's fury into a symphony of sorrow that filled the air. I knelt beside her resting place, the cold ground beneath me a stark contrast to the warmth that had briefly enveloped me in her presence. "Eleanor," I whispered, using the name we had discovered from the old records and the diary left behind by a previous resident. "I'm sorry for your loss. Please, find peace." As if responding to my plea, a gentle warmth began to emanate from the grave, the oppressive cold giving way to a soothing embrace. The cries softened, transforming into a melodic whisper that seemed to blend with the fading storm. The snow around me shimmered with a subtle light, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me, the sorrow that had plagued us all finally beginning to lift. With a final, heartfelt whisper, Eleanor's spirit seemed to ascend, her form dissolving into the snowflakes that danced around me. The storm had passed, leaving behind a serene stillness that felt like a promise of peace. I stood up, the weight of her loss now shared between us, and made my way back to the village, knowing that Eleanor had finally found the rest she had sought. Life in Frostwood slowly returned to normal, the memory of Eleanor's tragic fate serving as a solemn reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of grief. The cries ceased, replaced by the gentle whispers of the wind through the pines, a haunting yet comforting presence that reminded us of the spirits that lingered beyond our understanding. Years later, the story of Eleanor Whitaker became a part of Frostwood's lore, a tale passed down through generations as a reminder to cherish the lives we have and to honor the memories of those we've lost. The grave site remained a place of quiet reflection, the snow-covered ground a testament to the enduring bond between the living and the dead. Whenever a storm threatens to descend upon Frostwood, the villagers find solace in knowing that Eleanor's spirit watches over us, her cries now a gentle lullaby that sings of peace and remembrance. And as I sit by the fire, sharing her story with those who listen, I am reminded that some souls never truly leave us. They linger in the whispers of the wind, forever a part of the snow-covered landscape they once called home. Story number 5. The Woman on the Snowy Road. Winter in Alaska is not just a season. It's a formidable adversary that tests the very limits of human endurance. The vast expanse of snow-covered plains stretches endlessly, interrupted only by the jagged peaks of the Brooks Range piercing the sky. In 1967, I found myself navigating one of the most treacherous blizzards of my life, a tempest that would etch itself into my memory forever. I was hauling freight through the remote stretches of the Alaskan wilderness, a routine journey for a seasoned truck driver like me. My rig, a sturdy Kenworth with a dependable engine, was my lifeline in these desolate roads. The radio was off, a decision I often made to avoid the static-filled chatter that offered little comfort against the howling winds outside. The temperature had plummeted to -40 degrees, the kind of cold that gnaws at your bones and seeps into your very soul. As dusk began to fall, the sky transformed into a canvas of swirling gray, the first heavy flakes of snow beginning to fall. I glanced at the horizon, calculating my next move. The forecast had predicted a severe storm, but nothing in the reports had prepared me for the ferocity that was about to descend upon these roads. By midnight, the blizzard was in full rage. Visibility was reduced to mere feet, the world outside my windshield a relentless blur of white. The wind howled like a living creature, battering my truck with icy fingers that threatened to tear it apart. I pulled over onto the shoulder, the road barely discernible beneath the thick blanket of snow. My fingers numb, I reached for a flask of hot coffee, the warmth a small comfort against the unforgiving cold. That's when I saw her, a figure standing motionless in the middle of the road, barely visible through the blinding snow. She was a woman, her silhouette delicate against the storm's fury, wearing a thin, flowing dress that clung to her frail frame. Her presence was both ethereal and unnerving, an anomaly in the midst of nature's wrath. My heart pounded as I slowed the truck to a halt, the engine's growl barely audible over the storm's roar. The woman didn't move, didn't react to my presence. She simply stood there, her gaze fixed on the swirling chaos around her. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay inside, I felt an inexplicable urge to help her. I stepped out into the storm, the cold biting at my skin, each breath forming a visible puff in the frigid air. The snow whipped around me, stinging my face and obscuring my vision. I approached cautiously, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, revealing her face, pale, almost luminescent, eyes wide with an unspoken fear. "Are you all right?" I called out, my voice barely carrying over the howling wind. She didn't respond. Instead, she lifted her hand, palm open in a silent plea. My heart ached with compassion, the sight of her so vulnerable tugging at something deep within me. I reached out, intending to offer warmth, but as my hand neared hers, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the storm like mist under the morning sun. Panicked, I watched as she vanished before my eyes, leaving behind nothing but the relentless blizzard. My rational mind struggled to comprehend what I had just witnessed. Was it a mirage? A trick of the light? I needed answers, but the storm made it impossible to see anything clearly. Before I could gather my thoughts, I noticed the footprints, small, delicate impressions leading away from the spot where she had stood. They were human, unmistakably so, but unlike any I had seen before. No scuff marks, no disturbances to the snow, just pristine, unbroken lines that seemed to beckon me deeper into the wilderness. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I followed the trail, my truck abandoned on the icy shoulder. Each step was a battle against the storm, the cold seeping into my bones, threatening to immobilize me. The footprints led me into a dense forest, the trees towering above like silent guardians of forgotten secrets. The wind howled louder here, the snow piling higher, making progress agonizingly slow. Hours passed as I trudged through the relentless storm, the footprints leading me further away from any semblance of civilization. Exhaustion set in, my muscles aching, my mind fogged by the cold. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, the storm began to abate, the wind's fury slowly dissipating into a haunting silence. In the clearing ahead, I saw the remnants of an old cabin, half buried in snow, its wooden structure weathered by time and the elements. The footprints stopped abruptly at the doorstep, leaving me with more questions than answers. My flashlight illuminated the entrance, revealing broken windows and a door that hung ajar, creaking softly in the residual wind. Summoning every ounce of strength, I approached the cabin, the air around me heavy with an unspoken sorrow. Inside, the space was cold and empty, the remnants of a life long gone scattered across the floor. A dusty photograph lay on a decaying table, showing a family smiling beneath the same swirling snowstorms that now threatened to claim me. As I reached for the photo, a sudden gust of wind blew through the broken windows, extinguishing my flashlight and plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as the temperature dropped even further, my breath visible in the freezing air. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant howl of the wind and the creaking of the old cabin. A soft, mournful crying echoed through the room, coming from the basement below. My heart raced as I realized the woman's cries were not just a figment of my imagination, but a lingering echo of tragedy that still haunted this place. I knew I had to find her, to understand the sorrow that bound her spirit to this forsaken cabin. Descending the creaky stairs, the basement was cold and damp, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. The crying grew louder, more desperate, guiding me to a small, forgotten corner of the room where an old, broken doll lay beneath a pile of rubble. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow me, reflecting the sadness that permeated the space. I reached out, touching the doll's frigid surface, and felt a surge of emotion, grief, fear, and an overwhelming sense of loss. It was then that the apparition appeared, the woman I had seen on the road, standing before me with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression. "Why are you here?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and compassion. She didn't respond with words but conveyed her pain through her silent presence. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of her story. Had she been lost in the storm, seeking shelter, only to meet a tragic end within these walls? Her cries were a testament to her eternal search for peace, a plea for someone to remember her and help her find rest. Determined to ease her suffering, I searched the basement for anything that might offer a clue, a journal, a letter, anything that could shed light on her plight. Among the debris, I found an old diary, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. The entries detailed the lives of a family who had once lived in the cabin, their struggles against the harsh winters, and the unimaginable loss they had endured when a severe blizzard had taken their youngest child. Lily. Her final entry was a desperate plea for help, a mother's anguish as she searched for her lost daughter, only to be left with an unbearable grief that bound her spirit to the cabin. The realization hit me hard. This woman was Eleanor Whitaker, forever trapped by her sorrow, her cries a haunting reminder of a love lost to the unforgiving winter. I knew what I had to do. With the diary in hand, I performed a simple ritual, honoring Eleanor's memory and offering her the peace she so desperately sought. I placed the photograph of her family on the table, lit candles around the room, and recited the heartfelt words from her final entry. As the last words left my lips, the temperature began to rise, the oppressive cold lifting as if a heavy burden had been removed. The apparition of Eleanor softened, her eyes filled with gratitude as her form began to fade, the sorrow in her expression replaced by a serene calm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a gentle breeze that carried away the lingering pain. "May you find peace as well." With that, she vanished, leaving me alone in the now peaceful cabin. The crying had ceased, replaced by a profound silence that felt like a promise of tranquility. I knew then that I had helped her find the closure she had long sought, freeing her spirit from the eternal winter that had held her captive. As I trudged back through the thinning snowstorm, the footprints that had led me into this nightmare were gone, erased by the relentless snow. The road ahead was clear, the path illuminated by the rising sun that promised a new beginning. I reached my truck, the engine roaring to life, and drove away from the haunted cabin, the memory of Eleanor's sorrow now a distant echo in the vast Alaskan wilderness. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the experience remains etched in my mind, a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the restless spirits that linger in the shadows. Whenever a blizzard threatens, I find myself recounting the tale of Eleanor Whitaker, a story of love, loss, and the enduring power of compassion. If you ever find yourself driving through the remote roads of Alaska during a fierce winter storm, remember the story of the woman on the snowy road. Respect the histories embedded in these frozen landscapes, for some souls remain bound by their grief, waiting for someone to hear their cries and help them find peace amidst the endless snow. Story number 6. Echoes of the Silent Snow. Winter in Wyoming is a force that demands respect. The vast, snow-covered plains stretch endlessly, the horizon blurring where the sky meets the earth. In 2009, my wife, Laura, our 10-year-old son, Tommy, and I decided to embark on a family vacation to escape the bustle of city life. We rented a sturdy truck, packed with essentials, and set our sights on the remote corners of the Rockies, eager for tranquility and adventure. The first few days were everything we hoped for. We hiked through pristine trails, skied down gentle slopes, and reveled in the serenity that only nature can provide. Tommy, with his boundless energy, was in his element, building snowmen and chasing after snowflakes like they were magical creatures. Laura and I cherished the quiet moments by the fireplace each evening, sharing stories and watching the snow blanket the landscape in peaceful silence. However, our idyllic retreat took a sudden turn as an unexpected storm began to brew. By the fourth night, dark clouds loomed ominously over the mountains, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees with a fury that sent chills down our spines. The forecast had predicted heavy snowfall, but the intensity of the storm surpassed all expectations. As the first flakes of the blizzard began to fall, visibility dropped to near zero, and the roads became treacherous. Realizing we were unlikely to make it back in the storm, we sought shelter at an old, abandoned cabin we had passed earlier in our journey. The cabin stood solitary amidst a dense forest, its wooden exterior weathered by years of neglect. Despite its eerie appearance, it offered the only refuge from the relentless storm. With no other options, we decided to spend the night there, hoping the storm would pass by morning. Inside, the cabin was cold and musty, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and mildew. We lit a fire in the stone fireplace, the flickering flames providing some semblance of warmth against the biting cold outside. Tommy, always the curious one, explored the cabin, his small hands tracing the intricate patterns carved into the wooden beams. Laura and I unpacked our limited supplies, trying to make the space as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. As the night deepened, the storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a chorus of restless spirits. The cabin creaked and groaned under the force of the wind, each gust rattling the windows and doors. We huddled together, trying to stay warm, but an unsettling feeling began to creep over us. It was as if the cabin itself was alive, its walls whispering secrets we couldn't comprehend. Around midnight, a piercing cry shattered the uneasy silence. Tommy, jolted awake, pointed towards the basement door. "Daddy, Mommy, someone's crying," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. Laura and I exchanged worried glances before deciding to investigate. Armed with a flashlight, we cautiously descended the creaky wooden stairs into the basement. The basement was cold, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. As we reached the bottom, the crying stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on us like a heavy blanket. We searched the small, cluttered space, finding nothing out of the ordinary: old tools, dusty boxes, and remnants of past occupants long forgotten. Confused and unnerved, we turned to leave, but as we ascended the stairs, the basement door slammed shut with a force that sent us both stumbling back. Laura grabbed the door handle, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. The crying resumed, louder and more desperate this time, echoing through the basement like the anguished wails of a lost soul. Tommy, hearing our distress, began to cry softly from above, heightening our sense of fear. Desperate to escape, I grabbed a heavy flashlight and began to force the door open, my muscles straining against the stubborn handle. With a final, powerful shove, the door gave way, and we stumbled out into the basement. Gasping for breath, the crying ceased immediately, leaving us in a tense silence that felt almost suffocating. We hurried back upstairs, pulling Tommy close to us, and decided to leave the cabin as soon as the storm allowed. However, the night was far from over. The storm raged on, and the cabin seemed to become a labyrinth of shadows and whispers, each corner hiding unseen terrors. Every creak and groan of the house amplified our fears, making it difficult to differentiate between reality and our own imagination. The next morning, the storm had finally subsided, leaving behind a world transformed by snow and ice. We stepped outside, the air crisp and biting, and began the trek back to civilization. As we loaded our truck, a sense of relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. Just as we were about to depart, Laura noticed something chilling in the snow-covered field adjacent to the cabin. A pair of small footprints leading away into the dense forest. They were unmistakably human but too small for an adult. And disturbingly, they continued for several hundred yards before abruptly stopping. "We need to check this out," Laura said, her voice wavering between fear and determination. Against my better judgment, driven by a need to understand what was happening, I grabbed my coat and ventured into the snowy wilderness, with Laura following close behind. The The footprints led us deeper into the forest, the trees towering above us like silent sentinels guarding dark secrets. The snow crunch under our boots as we followed the trail, each step taking us further away from safety and deeper into the unknown. After walking for what felt like hours, the footprints abruptly ended at an old, overgrown grave marked with the name Eleanor Whitaker. The grave was weathered, the name barely legible, surrounded by thick snow that had settled over the site. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that Eleanor Whitaker was the mother of Tommy's missing classmate, a girl who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances several years prior. As we stood there, the wind picked up, swirling snow around us in a frenzied dance. The temperature dropped sharply, and an overwhelming sense of sorrow enveloped us. It was as if the spirits of those lost were reaching out, their grief palpable in the freezing air. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a faint, sorrowful melody, a lullaby that seemed to come from the depths of the grave itself. Tommy, still trembling, whispered, "Daddy, Mommy, I feel like she's crying for help." Laura nodded, her eyes moist with tears. "We need to help her find peace." Determined to put an end to the haunting cries, we decided to perform a simple memorial at Eleanor's grave. We gathered stones, candles, and a few personal items that felt significant, hoping to honor her memory and ease her restless spirit. As we arranged the items around the grave, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive sorrow began to lift, replaced by a sense of calm and gratitude. "Rest in peace, Eleanor," I whispered, lighting the candles. "May you find the peace you've been seeking." As the flames flickered softly in the snowy landscape, the lullaby ceased, and a profound silence settled over the grave. The snow around us seemed to glow with a gentle light, and the oppressive atmosphere that had once dominated the area was now replaced by a serene stillness. We felt a sense of accomplishment, knowing that we had done something to help a lost soul find her way. Packing up our belongings, we left the cabin behind, the memory of that harrowing night etched into our hearts. The journey back was quiet, each of us lost in our thoughts, reflecting on the supernatural experience we had endured. The footprints we had followed were gone, erased by the relentless snow, leaving us with only the memory of Eleanor's sorrowful cries and the peace we had helped her achieve. Years have passed since that winter in Wyoming, but the experience remains a haunting reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. Tommy often asks about that night, his innocent curiosity tinged with lingering fear, and I find myself recounting the tale to others, warning them of the restless spirits that may still wander the snowy plains, searching for peace. Winter still comes to Wyoming each year, bringing with it the beauty and brutality that define the region. Sometimes, when the snow falls just right and the wind carries a faint melody through the trees, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing near an old grave, her presence a silent testament to the enduring power of love and loss. It's a reminder that some souls remain bound to the earth, their stories etched into the fabric of the land, waiting for someone to listen and help them find their way home. If you ever find yourself traversing the remote trails of Wyoming during the dead of winter, remember the story of Eleanor Whitaker and the echoes of her sorrow. Respect the histories embedded in these silent landscapes, for some souls find peace only when their stories are heard and honored by those willing to listen. And always, keep an eye on the snow-covered fields, for amidst the beauty lies the potential for encountering the restless spirits of the past. Story number 7. Echoes in the Blizzard. Winter in the Rocky Mountains is both a beautiful and unforgiving force. The snow-covered peaks glisten under the pale sunlight, and the silence of the vast expanse is only broken by the occasional howl of the wind. In 1983, my friends and I, Tom, Sarah, Mike, and I, decided to embark on a mountaineering expedition that we hoped would challenge us and bring us closer together. Little did we know, the mountains held secrets that would haunt us forever. We arrived at the base camp just as dusk began to settle. The sky painted in hues of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. Our plan was to ascend to Eagle Peak, a formidable summit that had claimed many a brave soul. Equipped with our gear and fueled by excitement, we set out early the next morning. The first few days were idyllic. We trekked through pristine trails, our laughter echoing through the trees as we shared stories around the campfire each night. The camaraderie was strong, and the challenges of the climb only strengthened our bond. However, as we ascended higher, the weather began to change. The clear skies gave way to ominous clouds, and the temperature plummeted rapidly. On the fourth day, as we neared the summit, a fierce snowstorm descended upon us. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, and the snow whipped around us with relentless fury. Visibility dropped to mere feet, turning the familiar landscape into a disorienting maze of white. We were forced to take shelter in a small, abandoned cabin we stumbled upon amidst the blinding blizzard. The cabin was cold and damp, its wooden walls groaning under the weight of the storm. We huddled together, trying to stay warm as the hours dragged on. The storm outside showed no signs of relenting, and the howling winds seemed to carry an unsettling energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Around midnight, as we tried to drift off to sleep, we heard it, the faint sound of screaming piercing through the storm. It was a haunting, desperate cry that seemed to emanate from all around us. Yet there was no identifiable source. Tom, ever the skeptic, dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our minds. But Sarah and Mike exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions mirroring my own fear. The screams continued, growing louder and more frantic with each passing minute. We sat up in our bunks, hearts pounding, trying to locate the origin of the sound. The storm seemed to intensify, the wind now carrying an almost mournful wail that resonated deep within my bones. It was as if the mountains themselves were crying out in anguish, unable to bear the tension any longer. We decided to investigate, armed with flashlights and a sense of unease. We cautiously made our way out of the cabin, braving the fierce blizzard. The snow was thick and heavy, making each step a laborious task. The screams guided us, leading us deeper into the wilderness, away from the safety of the cabin. After what felt like hours of trudging through the relentless storm, we reached a clearing illuminated by the faint light of our flashlights. There, amidst the swirling snow, stood a lone figure, a man, his form barely discernible against the white backdrop. His eyes were wide with terror, and his mouth was open in a silent scream that mirrored the cries we had heard throughout the night. "Help me," he seemed to say, his gaze pleading and desperate. We approached cautiously, but as we drew closer, the figure began to fade, his presence dissipating into the storm as if he had never been there. Confused and shaken, we searched the area but found no trace of him, no footprints, no belongings, nothing to indicate his existence. The only evidence of his presence was the lingering sense of sorrow that hung in the air. As the storm began to subside, we returned to the cabin, our minds reeling from the encounter. Exhausted and emotionally drained, we decided to spend the rest of the night in silence, hoping to find some semblance of peace. But as dawn broke, revealing the aftermath of the storm, we discovered something chilling. The campsite had been disturbed. Large, unnatural footprints circled around our tent, leading into the dense forest. The prints were deep and wide, far larger than any animal we'd encountered, and they abruptly stopped without a trace. Panic set in as we realized that whatever or whoever had been following us during the storm was still out there, lurking in the shadows of the mountains. We packed up our gear quickly, eager to leave the haunted wilderness behind. As we descended the mountain, the footprints remained fresh in our minds, a constant reminder that we were not alone. Back at base camp, we attempted to make sense of the night's events. We consulted local guides and scoured maps, but there was no record of the man we had seen or the footprints that had led us astray. It was as if the mountains had swallowed the truth, hiding their darkest secrets beneath layers of snow and ice. Days turned into weeks, and the experience continued to haunt us. Nightmares filled our sleep, and the memory of the screaming man lingered in our minds. We couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us back. Its presence a silent shadow that watched us from the corners of our vision. Our friendships began to fray under the strain of fear and paranoia, the once strong bonds now weakened by the shared trauma. One evening, as we sat around a dwindling fire, Tom finally broke the silence. "I think we're cursed," he said, his voice barely audible. "Whatever that was, is still out there, and it's not going to let us go." Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "We need to leave. Now." But leaving was easier said than done. The Rockies are vast and unforgiving, and the weather was already turning once more. We decided to stay for one more night, hoping that the storm would pass and that we could find a safe route out. As night fell, the winds began to howl again, stronger than before, and the snow fell in heavy, relentless sheets. Around midnight, the screams returned, louder and more desperate than ever. This time, they were accompanied by the sound of cracking ice and the distant thud of something heavy moving through the snow. We huddled together, fear gripping our hearts as the realization dawned upon us. We were being hunted. With no other choice, we fled the base camp, our breaths visible in the frigid air as we ran through the storm. The mountains seemed to shift around us, the landscape warping into a labyrinth of white. The screams followed us, a constant reminder of the nightmare we couldn't escape. The footprints reappeared, leading us back towards the haunted clearing, trapping us in a never-ending cycle of fear and desperation. Exhausted and broken, we stumbled through the snow, our bodies numb from the cold and our minds shattered by the relentless terror. Just as hope seemed lost, we emerged from the storm into a clear morning, the sun shining brightly over the snow-covered peaks. We collapsed, realizing that we had somehow escaped the clutches of the haunted wilderness. But the scars of that night remained etched in our souls. We never spoke of the experience again, each of us carrying the burden of the screams and the shadowy figure that had pursued us through the storm. The Rockies had tested us in ways we could never have imagined, leaving us forever changed by the echoes of the blizzard and the haunting cries that still linger in our memories. Years later, whenever a fierce snowstorm grips the mountains, I find myself staring into the swirling white, the memory of that night playing like a ghostly echo in my mind. The Rockies remain a place of beauty and mystery, their snowy peaks hiding secrets that refuse to be forgotten. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, I swear I can still hear the desperate screams carried by the wind, a chilling reminder that some nightmares never truly end. If you ever find yourself venturing into the remote stretches of the Rockies during the dead of winter, heed the warnings of those who have walked these paths before you. Respect the power of the mountains, for they hold stories of love, loss, and the restless spirits that roam beneath the snow. And remember, in the heart of the blizzard, you are never truly alone.